Greetings, my dear truth seekers. A few days ago, the Chinese authorities signed a very curious document, a military directive on the use of Chinese armed forces in the absence of a formal declaration of war. Simply put, now the Chinese army can be used for a special military operation. The phone call of the leader of the People's Republic of China Xi Jinping to the Kremlin was a further striking example of that. Since the outbreak of hostilities in Ukraine, all these months China has not taken an open and direct pro-Russian position, but simply called on the parties to peace. All this time, Beijing has sought not to run into harsh US sanctions. In early March, China even stated that Beijing had nothing to do with the conflict in Ukraine and that the West should not associate the Chinese with these events. And now, 4 months later, China has decided to radically change its rhetoric. To the surprise of many, Comrade Xi Jinping changed his rhetoric and declared that China fully supports Russia in matters of security and sovereignty. My friends, you need to understand that Xi Jinping is making such statements for a reason. Looks like Comrade Xi Jinping now needs the same support from Russia. Well, after these recent events, things are starting to get clearer for me. First, a military directive on a special operation is signed in China, and then, the Chinese leader calls the Kremlin in order to enlist Moscow's support before the start of a military operation in Taiwan. The United States, meanwhile, has already managed to respond to this. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said that the United States would not stop arms supplies to Taiwan even for one day. However, in this whole story around Taiwan, one should pay more attention to the active participants in an impending armed conflict. Until the very last, China harbored the illusion that it would be able to regain the island of Taiwan, which Beijing considers its own, through peaceful means. However, the United States never gives anything away just like that. Apparently, the Russian leadership had fewer illusions on this matter. That is why Moscow decided to move from words to deeds, after seeing that negotiations with the West give nothing but the loss of precious time. And it looks like China has begun to understand this too. The United States wants to arrange for China in Taiwan something similar to what is now happening in Ukraine. The Americans will not give this island to the Chinese without a fight. It's pretty obvious that the United States will fight for this island until the last Taiwanese. Washington has always known that Moscow and Beijing will not forever tolerate near their borders pro-Western governments that lead countries that historically have always been allies in part of Russia and China. In the summer of 2021, the United States even tried to get Russia on its side by promising Moscow concessions on the Ukrainian issue. However, Russia didn't agree to that deal and refused to betray China. And now, it is obvious that this decision of Russia was correct. Under the conditions of unprecedented sanctions against Russia, relying mostly on China and partly on India and several other countries, Russia was able to withstand the most powerful sanctions attack from the West. My friends, you need to understand that the West, led by the United States, would have attacked Russia with the help of sanctions anyway. However, if this attack had taken place immediately after the US had weakened China, then Russia would have been doomed. It is obvious that after the start of the military operation in Taiwan, the United States will begin to choke China in every possible way. Unfortunately, we must acknowledge the fact that there is a high probability that China, unlike Russia, will not be able to successfully go through all this. Because from a military point of view, China is not as strong as Russia. Unfortunately, China doesn't have a nuclear triad and a large number of modern nuclear missiles and their means of delivery. This will allow the United States and its allies to take part in the conflict directly. For example, the Americans will physically try to block the straits and trade routes for China, so that Beijing would not be able to sell goods and import resources. Without importing the necessary resources and exporting its goods, China's economy will not last long. Strikes of Chinese workers may begin, left without work due to the inability to sell manufactured goods. In this case, Beijing will not only have to stop the military operation in Taiwan, but the political situation within China itself may turn out to be quite tense. It is also worth noting the fact that at the moment Russia will not be able to provide military assistance to China, as Moscow will need some time to replenish its weapons arsenal due to hostilities in Ukraine. By the way, everything I have just told you is well known in Washington. And that is why it was precisely during this period of time the Americans began to provoke the Chinese with their statements about Taiwan and that the US Army would take a direct part in the war against China. However, despite all the risks and difficulties, China will still be forced to act, as the United States decided to discreetly remove the formulation on recognizing Taiwan as part of China from official documents on the State Department website. China noticed these unfriendly actions of Washington and made a lot of noise. Moreover, China was even forced to threaten the United States. All this can provoke the start of a special military operation in Taiwan at any moment. Beijing understands that without Russia's support, China is unlikely to achieve its goals. All these events are pushing China and Russia to create a full-fledged military alliance, which could also include India, Iran, Pakistan, and several other countries. This military alliance will turn out to be much larger in terms of power, population, and GDP than NATO and AUKUS. This military alliance will enable these countries to jointly repel any threats from the United States and its allies, including blockades and economic sanctions. In fact, the United States itself, through its own efforts, is pushing these countries to create such a military alliance. And these countries, in order to create such a military alliance, are even ready to turn a blind eye to some territorial disputes between themselves, for example, between India and China, since the geopolitical importance of creating such an alliance is much more important for these countries than territorial disputes. By their actions, the Americans are pushing these countries to create the most powerful military alliance in the world, not because they don't understand this, but because the United States is at an impasse and Washington needs to do something with China, since it is the United States' largest economic competitor. The Americans will have to fight with China literally naked, left without the import of Chinese shorts, pants, and sneakers. Americans will also be left without microchips, the largest production of which is located in Taiwan. And most importantly, the United States will not have a guarantee of success in the war with China, since the world's largest military alliance of the leading Eurasian powers will not give the West, led by the United States, any chance. After the collapse of the USSR, the United States pursued a very unreasonable policy for 30 years. The biggest mistake of the United States was the transfer of its production to Asia, thoughtless consumption and depletion of resources, underestimation, and lagging behind Russia in the field of advanced weapons. Unfortunately for the United States, Washington is unlikely to succeed in correcting its strategic mistakes. Time is lost, and the United States will have to say goodbye to hegemonic status and become a regular regional power.